My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at NDSU. And each year we have a series on a different issue. Last year was AI and humanities. And this year is civic civility. And so we're starting off in September with Chris Wilson, who is the Chief Compliance Officer of NDSU, used to be the Chief of Staff of the President. We don't hold that against him. But he's been doing this for a number of years for us because, as all of us know, it's incredibly important for us to be politically active, but in a way that respects the law of the state of North Dakota. Chris Wilson is NDSU's Chief Compliance Officer. I said he's been with NDSU since 2012. He served previously as NDSU's General Counsel from 2015 to 2024, and Chief. That's not right. And because you were Chief Counsel in 2024. That's been Chief.
Yeah, 2015, I became Chief of Staff.
That's a mistake. That's my fault. And Chief of Staff and as NDSCS General Counsel from 2013 through 2015. Before coming to NDSU, Wilson was the Associate General Counsel of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Prior to that, he was corporate attorney with
Schenig.
In PLLC, a law firm nationally known for its representation of higher education institutions. Wilson received his law degree from Cornell Law School and his undergraduate degree from Duke University. He's working towards his PhD in education at NDSU. For those of you who are unfamiliar how we do these public fora, he will present and then we have questions. We usually ask people to do the 30-30 rule for questions, 30 seconds or 30 words so that everybody has a chance to ask questions. And then we'll do, when everybody's done, we'll go back. So, but anyways, let's welcome our speaker.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming this afternoon. Oh, I might have to back. I try and do this presentation or this similar type presentation every couple of years during political years. It just helps us to make sure that people who want to become engaged are doing it correctly. It became acutely aware of these issues this past spring, with all the campus tumult that was going on across campus. We spent a lot of time this summer working on our free speech policies and procedures and tightening that stuff up, making sure that stuff kind of blow the dust off it, make sure it's all up to speed. With all of that stuff, we can put all the paperwork together as best we want, but if people don't know how to do it, it's not very useful stuff. So that's why we're re-engaging, making sure everybody who has any questions about what they want to be involved in, whether it's state level politics, national politics, whether it's something else, they can do it. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. Some important distinctions, some overarching things that you should be thinking about to the extent you want to become involved in political matters. There's a couple of key questions you need to be asking yourself every time. And those kind of key questions will help guide you with regard to what you need to do. And then there's the Corrupt Practices Act and Non-Corrupt Practices Act activities. I'll go through what those two distinctions are and why they matter. And then the last thing is legislative basics and communication. I'm going to try and cover all of this in about a half an hour. So I'm happy to take questions as we go along, but it's a lot of stuff, but it's relatively straightforward. At least, I've covered it a bunch of times, so it seems straightforward to me, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to stop me while I go along, and we'll have questions afterwards too. It's I'm very well, and I guess we have questions from online participants as well. So Tyler, don't bother to, just feel free to interrupt me if somebody wants to, has a question online during the presentation. The first thing to start with is the state board policy on this matter actually encourages all of us as employees of the public institution to become engaged in matters of that involve civic matters, political matters. We don't, the classic example, we don't abandon our rights at the schoolhouse gate. That's a kind of a paraphrase of a line that the Supreme Court used one time talking about students' rights, but it also applies to employee rights too. Yes, we're employees of NDSU, and yes, NDSU is a public entity, but that doesn't mean that we abandon our rights and opportunities to participate in matters impacting our state and country. And in fact, not only do we have the right to, the state board policy actually encourages it. So that's the starting point that we all come from. Nobody's being discouraged from participation. We're being encouraged to participate. The question is how. And these are the two distinctions that really need to guide when you go through the kind of when you're making a decision. How do I do this? The very first thing is, which hat are you wearing when you're engaging in the activity? Are you wearing your individual hat or are you wearing your employee hat? And we all wear different hats. That's the single most important one you can think of. When you're engaging in political activity, it is you. It is not NDSU. And we'll talk about how we can make those distinctions a little bit. But that's the key thing. Always remember, separate yourself from the entity when you're doing it. And then the second one we're going to cover first is election activity versus non-election activity. And that's a little bit more deep in the weeds, but it's probably one of the more important distinctions. And I'll go through why. And the reason why is the Corrupt Practices Act. The Corrupt Practices Act, it's a state law that prohibits, and that's I made these, I apologize, I've made these slides kind of wordy because I know they're going to post the slides up on their website. The NPEI will be posting the slides up on their website, and the links are active. So you can read through it now. You don't have to read through it now. It'll all be available afterwards, and the links are active, so it'll take you there. But essentially what that says is that you can't use state resources for political activities, state property or state services. So if we look at that, what that says, no person, well, we're only talking about natural people here, not institutions, may use any property. The key terms here are property, service, and political purpose. So those are the things we have to kind of figure out. What does that mean in order to understand how do we steer clear of this? Political purpose. So, because people are saying, well, wait a minute, NDSU chimes in at the legislative session all the time. We make political statements all the time. It's true. But the Corrupt Practices Act only covers, if you read the yellow section, statewide initiated referred measures, constitutional amendment or measures, ballot measures, and election of candidates. Essentially things that happen on election day. Think about measures and candidates. So the Corrupt Practices Act applies to those two things. So that when we talk about the legislative session, which we will later on, because the legislative session doesn't involve an election, the Corrupt Practices Act doesn't come into play there. Now, you may notice sometimes you'll see, even though we're not allowed to use state resources for candidates and ballot initiatives, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, I just saw that candidate or that candidate was on campus in the Union giving a rally in the ballroom. Well, the green section is the exception to this, where candidates and entities on behalf of candidates can rent state resources at the market rates. So because the Union, or we have various places on campus that can be rented, the parties, the candidates, they can rent those places as part of their election, as long as we're charging probably the most recent example was the Republican statewide convention used the shack in the springtime. They paid market rates for that, made sure we went through everything they used got charged for, and we were very, very particular about that. Make sure everything was charged so that we stayed. They were probably pretty sick of hearing from me, to be honest, because I wanted to make sure that we stayed within the Corrupt Practices Act on that one. Property, and this is where kind of fun with drafting becomes an issue. Property includes motor vehicles, telephones, typewriters, adding machines, postage and postage meters, funds of money, and buildings. Some of those things may not be as important these days as when they once were. I don't know that anybody has an adding machine on their desk anymore. And the way they drafted it, it should be kind of like all assets of the state, including without limitation. these would have made it a little bit clearer drafting, because an argument could be made that literally if you're not using one of those particular types of things, it doesn't cover it. I would not recommend that. I'm not saying that that's the interpretation that will be used, but the lawyer in me always, wants to do that. But essentially property is what we think. It's the assets of NDSU. Don't use the email accounts, don't use our equipment, don't use our cars, don't use anything along those lines. These are not things, envelopes we want to be pushing. And so despite the limited language of the yellow section, think of it in a more broad context. We don't want to push envelopes. Services is the next one. And the services one is important too, particularly for employment, because it talks about employee time is a service. So if you are working here, now this gets a little tricky with faculty versus staff. Faculty don't have to book their vacation time, but so they have to be mindful of that issue. But staff, if you were out there participating in political activities, there needs to be a vacation time slip, or if you're doing during business hours, if you're doing a non-during business hours, it doesn't really matter. But if you are using business time, there should be a corresponding vacation slip or annual leave time to reflect the fact that you were gone, because that is in fact your personal time. Because if you don't, if you're using university time, that could run afoul of this statute. And why do we not want to run afoul of this statute? There's a bunch of statutes in the books, by the way, that just like they said, don't do this, and then they don't say why, like what happens if you don't. This one does say what happens if you don't. It's a criminal statute. So it's a Class A misdemeanor. And a Class A misdemeanor is punishable by 365 days in jail and or a $3,000 fine. When I was general counsel, now chief compliance officer, there are certain things you tend to be a little more risk adverse to, and the criminal statutes are those areas that you're going to be a little bit more risk adverse to, simply because the punishment's a little bit greater. And here's the one thing that I really want to kind of drive home. This is individual activity. NDSU does not engage in prohibited political activity under the statute. And NDSU is not authorizing anybody to engage in prohibited political activity under the statute. That means that if somebody is engaging in prohibited political activity, they're doing so on their own initiative without authorization from the university, which means that they're literally on the hook for the thing themselves. That means that they are the ones who will be criminally charged. The institution won't be charged. They themselves will be criminally charged, could be. The university will not be able to provide legal representation for those employees. So we're represented, the NDSU is represented by the Attorney General's office. That employee or employees who were to get arrested for something like that would not get the benefit of NDSU's counsel. They'd have to pay for their own legal defense out of their own proceeds. So it's something that we need to be keeping in mind. If somebody gets arrested, it's not going to be the institution. So that's why I want people to really think about, if they're going to engage in political activity, the first distinction we talked about, make sure you separate yourself out from it. Don't use university resources. And is this an election, or is this just a non-election activity? If it's election activity, be super careful, because that's the one where you can go to jail for. And it does happen. The funny thing is, there's not a lot of case law on this particular act. There is one case law that one decision. Usually what happens is, the legislature creates a law, and then people get charged under it, and then courts make decisions that tell you, and based upon those decisions, you start getting a little clarity about how all this thing works. And so you can give your clients more guidance with regard to, oh, okay, this is what this really means. This is what it covers here. Like, there's only been one case under this. And it was a Supreme Court justice, ironically, who was charged. And the Supreme Court justice was charged because he was running for re-election, sat at his bench in his robes, but the bench, guess what, was a state property. took a picture and said, reelect Judge so-and-so. And opponent said that's a violation of you're using state resources for political purposes. It went up to the Supreme Court. And the decision was they created a de minimis exception to this, saying like, well, de minimis usages of the law is not going to pay attention to like de minimis violations, and the use of the rental value of a judge's desk was so de minimis that, you know, we're not going to charge him with that. That is the one and only case on this. We have no idea what else constitutes de minimis. Is a single email from your work account going to constitute a violation of the law? I don't know. That would seem to me somewhere that maybe somebody could argue de minimis. Would 10,000 emails from your work account constitute de minimis? Probably not. But where is that standard? We don't know. When I say, but it does get brought up because even though it doesn't always go to trial or charges, opponents in campaigns are oftentimes trying to charge the other one with it, and it goes into the news media. Oh, so and so violated this. One of my favorite ones was Strand, who was running for mayor a few years ago. Tim probably remembers this one. He put his name up on in lights on a water tower, and they were trying to figure out whether or not the light on a water tower constituted a de minimis. And I think the local state's attorney indicated that that was a de minimis violation and didn't charge on it. But like, even if you don't get the criminal charges, you got a lot of nasty publicity. So, you know, it's going to be difficult. So just steer clear of it. And if at any time you're like, I'm not sure what this is or whether I should do this or not, give me a call. Give Matt Hammer at the Attorney General's office a call. Well, it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure on this thing. We do not want to be messing around with these things. And 9 times out of 10, we can give you a very clear answer. There's some that are, you know, tricky. We have to worry about, but for the most part, most people's issues are quite clear. Non-election activities. So that was for stuff that occurs up through election day, be it fall, spring, whatever the election day is. Election day is come and gone. So now it's the day after election day. We start gearing up for the legislative session. The good news is Corrupt Practices Act no longer applies. The criminal statute portion of this kind of goes by the wayside. So you don't have to worry about getting thrown in the clink for violations here. The bad side is you can still violate NDSU policy, which could trigger employment consequences for you. But at least, you know, that's a more manageable internal situation. You're not, you know, the state's attorney's not being brought into that thing. And so kind of one of those things, letters to the editor, anything that's not associated with a ballot initiative or a candidate. You want to write a letter to the editor saying the legislature should do X, that's what we're talking about. You want to reach, you know, we all have lots of, you know, all of us have state representatives, state senators, talking to them, doing things. You should be doing that. You know, and that's what we're talking about. Testimony during legislation, everything that doesn't have to do with the ballot initiative falls under this next section that we're going to be talking about. And these are the same rule applies for number 1. Don't use NDSU resources for your personal political, whatever your interest, whatever you're doing. And that you can find that in section 13 of NDSU policy 160. Like I said, you're not gonna, no criminal charges here, but it'd still be a policy violation if you're doing that, and we're trying to avoid that. And here's number 2 is the one that, you know, you all know it, you all see it all the time. This is where you say, I'm not speaking on behalf of my institution. And that is set forth in section 12. So policy 160 is the political activities on campus policy. So a lot of the things I'm talking about today, you can find all in that policy. But there's the actual language right there. I quoted the whole thing. that their political positions and views are their own and not necessarily those of the university. For those people who are in upper level administrative positions, the second sentence is also important. Employees in upper level administrative positions must be especially careful to avoid making any partisan political commitment on behalf of the university or the Board of Higher Education. And just veering off from this a little bit, like, so for those who are in senior positions, they have to be extra careful. And we all know it. We don't make statements. We tend to be neutral on anything publicly. Not only this sentence, but the institution itself that reflects also, if you go to policy 160, like the first 5 sections of it, it's very well drafted policy, and you will not hear me say that often here at NDSU. But it's really, those first 5 paragraphs are really well drafted, and they talk about the fact that the institution, these are the individual, but the institution itself is neutral on most things. That it's our job to create a venue in which ideas are discussed, and if to the extent that the institution takes an institutional position, it can have a chilling impact on discussion. So that's why the institution it's not a that's not a prohibition. The university can and occasionally does take a position on something, but by and large, it's neutral on these things. What this second sentence of 12 is saying is, in order to reflect that kind of theme where the institute, it can, it doesn't mean much if the institution doesn't take an official position, but all the senior administrators are taking an official position, individual, well, you know which way the wind's blowing. So like this kind of reflects that, like, we need to be thoughtful about the fact that we are supposed to be an open market of ideas here. So that's why, but if you are taking a letter of the editor position, and by the way, they won't print it. So if you write a letter to the editor in the forum and, you add in the thing that says, I'm, speaking on behalf of mine, they'll edit it out and we don't care. I mean, like, because they usually have a word count. Like, I'd prefer it if they did print it, but like, when I say I don't care, I'd prefer if they did print it. But like, if you try and they edit it out for content and edited that part out, that's not on you. That's on the forum for having, edited it out. Special rules, and these don't happen that much, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on them. But if you're running for political office, 160, 10, and 11 apply. 10 is, that's where you have to start working out with your supervisor to figure out coverage issues. Who's going to cover you? Are you taking leave? That kind of stuff during the campaign time period, how that's going to work. And then section 11 deals with if you actually win, and you're in the state legislature, you have to take leave during that time. The university can pay you up to a certain percentage of your salary during that leave, but all that has to be worked out, and that's in sections 10 and 11 there. We haven't had that in some time. I don't think we haven't had anybody in the legislature for a while, so it's I'd have to blow the dust off that. I remember how that section worked, to be honest. And the number 2 could happen more, and honestly probably just wouldn't find out about it very much. That is if you're start really getting into doing something, political activities, or if you're doing consulting work for a group. If you're consulting for a political candidacy or something along those lines, and it starts interfering with your work, we have to have, as an employee, we have to have a conversation with regard to that. You're under NDSU policy, your primary work obligation is to the university. And as a result, we expect during normal hours that you're going to be here and doing work. Doesn't mean you can't, but it could trigger disclosure and approval requirements under external professional activities policy, which is policy 152. Same as if you're doing consulting for anybody else professionally. If you're politics is just like another field. If you're doing some work, we might need to take some extra steps. Once again, doesn't happen that often, but if it does become something that, be mindful. Got 5 minutes to cover the entire legislature. That should be good. Legislative basics. So after November, a lot of our activities, by the way, NDSU is completely neutral when it comes to candidates, the new candidates and ballot initiatives. You know, there's a ballot initiative coming up with regard to the Fargo Dome. You will not find NDSU having a position on that. That's probably the one that hits us the most right now. You know, we've had in the past 10 years, we've had a few ballot initiatives impacting State Board of Higher Education organization, things like, and you'll never find a position. We are allowed to take positions. We're allowed to provide guidance, factual based guidance with regard to ballot initiatives, and that's all we're allowed to do. And even that I don't like to do, because one man's fact, as we've seen in the last few years, one man's fact is another man's opinion. So it starts getting a little tricky. So it's better just to err on the side of caution. But once the election's over, we do start gearing up for the legislature. You can find more information about the legislature, Article 4, 2 houses here in the North Dakota. Not all states have 2 houses. Some states are unicameral. All state senators and representatives are elected a term of 4 years. Every person here who's a resident of North Dakota has 1 state senator and 2 state representatives that represent them. You should get to know them. It's a very small state, and that's one of the real important parts. Like, I came from New York, I had no idea who my people were. You know, here they were my next door, literally my next door neighbor. So, you know, and you have a voice here in North Dakota. That's just crazy how much we have a voice. I mean, and so you should be meeting with your state senators and representatives, even don't just know who they are and how to reach them. Sessions occur once every 2 years, so we're on a biennial cycle. They are on odd years. So January, it'll start this coming January in odd years, and it lasts no longer than 80 days. It'll end sometime in April. There are 47 legislative districts in North Dakota. If you click there, if you go to the slide deck, you can click there, and it'll give you a map. Some of the districts are huge because there's just not a high population density. Here in Fargo, we have, I think, 8 in the local area, something like that, districts in the greater Fargo area. So you can find that. There's also a Find My Legislator there. You just type in your address and it'll give you the names and contact information for your senator and your 2 representatives. 69th Assembly will start January 7th is the tentative start, I believe. When the session starts, I mean, you could go there now, but when the session starts, there will be a wealth of information on the legislative website. Like, if you want to track bills, if you want to find out, it takes a little getting used to, but once you're used to it, you can find a ton of information about everything that's happening during the session. Bills start in either the House or the Senate. Because it's 80 days, it's 80 days of sheer insanity. I mean, it's half the bills start in the House, half the bills start in the Senate. Every legislator is entitled to enter a bill, whatever they want. A lot of them will die ignominious deaths very quickly, but they do have an opportunity to get a bill. And unlike the federal legislature, in Congress, there's a big difference here. In Congress, a legislator can enter a bill, but leadership gets to stop it, and it dies in committee. And in North Dakota, you can't do that. Every bill entered gets a committee assignment, gets a vote in committee, and then gets a floor vote. You know, so after it comes out of the committee just says yay or nay as far as recommendation, and then it gets a full floor vote. So that's an important distinction. Every vote, you know, and like I said, sometimes you get some crazy bills. You do, and particularly during the start of the session, there's some ones that are a little bit outside the 1 or 2 standard deviations from the normal. But they tend to die. But it's kind of fun to watch. And then where a lot of the action happens is in committee hearings and testimony, and that's where, like, NDSU will go up there. We go up and testify. The president does with regard to our budget bill. Our budget is put in as one of the first bills every year, higher ed budget. And so obviously that budget is a critical bill to NDSU. They go through, whichever survives one house, they get swapped over at the halftime. It's called crossover. And those that survive go to the other side and they do the whole thing over again. And the other side, bill, so, and then, almost never, not always, I don't know what the percentage is, but commonly the bills that pass the House don't line up exactly with bills that pass the Senate. It's the same number, but they've both tweaked it a little bit, so they don't line up exactly. So they go to a conference committee, and at the end, the conference committee hashes out the differences. They agree on some language that they can both agree on. Then they're both approved again, and then it goes over to the governor's signature. And I saw some people smirking. Schoolhouse Rock is on there. It is a fantastic. I just watched it again for like the 100th time. For those of a certain age, that was a wonderful explanation of how a bill becomes a law. I loved as a kid. I still do. NDSU is neutral on matters relating to elections. We do take position on legislative bills, few and far between. Mostly we only take positions with regard to our budget bill, but there's lots and lots of bills that happen every year. The ones that survive crossover, we're actively working on our budget bill, and we're working with this state board and the system office on some of the other bills. There's two different types of bills largely. There's appropriations bills and there's policy bills. Appropriation bills are bills that spend money. Policy bills are bills that like deal with our lives. And appropriations bills, that's our budget bill. Like that's the one where we're like 90+% of our engagement is on the budget bill to make sure we can keep the doors open and salaries going. But our policy bills, they tend to be the ones that grab the headlines. And so sometimes we get engaged, sometimes we can't get engaged. So it's a very complicated thing that goes on, but we're also work with the state board and the NDUS to figure out how to deal with some of the budget or the policy bills as they go along. As I mentioned, so you as employees, same rights apply. Whether if you're encouraged to participate in civic and political matters, you as an individual have the right to participate in these bills. Doesn't matter whether it's a bill that's favorable to NDSU or not, you have the right to participate in those. And those are the policies that say where that you can do that. Just make sure that you're not speaking for NDSU and don't use institutional resources, same rules. How does that presentation go? You may be talking to your legislators. You may want to go testify. Like there's a day on which public testimony is allowed on all bills. You may go up and during that thing, you can say, most of like if it's a stamp collecting bill, you don't even have to say you're with NDSU. No one cares unless you're like somehow associated with stamp collecting here at NDSU. Like nobody's going to care. But if it's a bill associated with something that you do at the university and you want to add a little gravitas to your presentation, say, I'm the so-and-so at NDSU, that's fine. You just also have to say, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I don't know if we have a stamp collecting section. Some just basic recommendations: separate your work from your activities. Do not use NDSU assets for personal activities. Number 3 used to be big, and I think most people have got the message now. Don't use your work email. I mean, when I started in higher ed 20 years ago, people were using their work email simultaneously. It was personal work. Everything was piled into their work email. People are doing better in a job now of separating those things out. Do not use your work email for work. Go get a Gmail account or whatever, and separate that. And then remember that your work time is an asset. If you're going to be doing some of the stuff, put a vacation slip in for it. Communicating with legislature, Tim is probably better at this advice than I am as far as what he would like to see. I will tell you from my perspective, identifying yourself as a constituent is always the most effective thing, particularly on the federal level, like as the federal delegation gets just inundated with communications and emails nonstop. And it's almost always just tons of I don't want to call it spam, but these emails that are part of 10,000 emails that went out to some on the same topic. You start off by saying, I'm so-and-so, I'm your constituent, and I live on 9th Street. You might get a little more attention when they realize that you can vote for them. Passion's good, but friendly and professional is also good. And then don't spend a lot of time. I've seen a lot of people kind of talk too much to them and not let the issue go once you made your point. So I am totally open for questions. Lots of things. I mean, lots of lived experiences on these things if you guys want to talk about them. Go ahead.
But you're in charge of the questions, and I'm a little afraid my boss is leaving, but this is a hypothetical. Legislator calls you on your personal phone while you're in your office, and your conversation morphs into a bill that they are putting about what you would do to improve it. So we have this conversation.
Okay, so that's an excellent point. Things that you receive, be it a phone call or an email, you don't have to worry about those things from. I can definitely speak to the policy issue, and I'm fairly certain the state's attorney would not consider a corrupt practices act if you got a whole bunch of emails emailed to you or account. Now, if you're out there soliciting saying like, yeah, please send everything to my work account, that might be different. But we all know we get 6 billion spam a day from everything. So your name, your email address is out there. Incidental stuff that you get is not going to be an issue. If somebody reaches out to you, I mean, that's not that big a deal, to be honest. I mean, like if I would say, like, and I do say this when I'm on the call with people, and in my capacity, I talk a lot with people. And I'll specifically say, like, yeah, I'm talking as the chief of staff here, or when I was talking as the chief of staff, or I'm taking the chief of staff hat off. I'm putting on, this is Chris Wilson talking. I'm not speaking on behalf of the university. I'm not speaking on behalf of, this is just, and most of the people, I've yet to meet a legislator who doesn't understand and appreciate that distinction. They know. And so like, if during the course of that conversation, like, so as long as you kind of say, hey, look, this is just, Dennis Cooley talking now. And the fact that you don't have vacations, you don't have to file for annual leave. So it becomes kind of a less of an issue. But even staff members, I don't think that would be that big a deal. But I think the bigger issue is just clarifying, not that, because you got the time and you got the who you're speaking for. You can easily deal with who you're speaking for. The time thing, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, unless you're on the phone for like 10 days. Yeah.
Sometimes we have faculty who are interviewed for articles that appear in the forum, and sometimes those topics can be political or related to political events. It seems like it falls a little bit under what Dennis was suggesting, that if you're reached out to and asked to speak about something, then the rules are a little bit different. Do you have any guidance or recommendations for folks who are being interviewed by local media or asked to speak to? I can give you a concrete example. Like back near the beginning of the pandemic, I was interviewed about why people may not be following public health recommendations.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a politically dicey topic. And I was just speaking to it as a communication professor.
Yeah.
But do I need to say things within that interview of, as a communication professor, but not a representative of NDSU,
Well,
I think.
I think as for the most part, the faculty, the reporter is going to know that they've reached out to you and that you're not speaking on behalf of the university. I would at the beginning of the interview just lay that groundwork. Just say like, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. Like, of course I'm not speaking on, on behalf of the university. And they're like, yeah, okay. And they won't write about it, and that's okay, because it will flow, that would interrupt the flow of the story. I think there's some basic understanding when people read a news story and some expert chimed in that they're not speaking on behalf of the institution. But but for your own protection, you know, you don't have to say it in front of every answer. But when you say, oh yeah, I'm happy to happy to participate, you know, I have to do it on my own initiative. I'm not talking on behalf of the university. Because if you are talking on behalf of the university, you have to go through university relations and, you know, that has, you know, they have to talk with Bryn and Bryn has to organize it and do all that stuff. The fact that, but they send them to various faculty members all the time, but it's implied that they're doing it on their own initiative. You also, just like you don't have to talk, you know, I mean, you can do it yourself, or if the forum calls you up and says, you know, I'd like you to, your opinion on this. No, I don't have to give it. So it's your choice. But if you do talk, you should probably cover yourself and just say that, even though they won't write it.
Thank you.
We do have one online. Margaret, if you want to unmute, you can certainly ask your question. Or...
Hiya. First of all, will you sing us "I'm Just a Bill"? I would love to have a reenactment. No? Okay.
If I could click on it right now, I'd play it, but I don't know how to do that, Maggie.
Yes. I'm wondering about nonpartisan things such as, can we encourage students or help students learn about who their representatives are, how to, like, where they can vote, how they could do absentee ballots if they're voting in their home district, that kind of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with that, but if students ask us about it.
Yeah, no, you can absolutely do all that stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, as long as you're not advocating for or against a ballot, and I apologize, I should have made this clearer earlier, that when the Corrupt Practices Act, it's not just that you're participating in election activity, it's that you're advocating for or against a ballot initiative or a candidate. So to the extent that you're just engaged in voter registration efforts or finding out factual information about who your state delegation is, how to tell them where their federal delegate, you can do that. And we would encourage you to do that. I mean, we are a university. We want people to be engaged in this. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that there are just always questions when students have just moved to the area about what that process is. So cool. Thank you.
And I have been singing that song in my office, like once it gets, it's one of those things that just gets in your head.
Can I clarify something that I think, is there anyone from University Relations here? No. I think even, like, I think that yes, faculty members can speak as experts, but I think University Relations still wants to know
Yeah.
when those interviews are going on. Because that you never know what else is in the news that day, and you might be ambushed about something that actually relates to the topic that you've been asked to be an expert on. So I think they just want to clarify that they still want to know.
That's a good point, yeah.
Those interviews.
Yeah.
You don't have to get permission.
Is Bryn the point of
Yes,
contact?
Bryn is,
for all?
yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, if you ever have any media questions, you don't have to participate, just call Bryn first. That's just kind of a general rule. Yeah, Tim.
COVID was bad in almost every way except the legislature switched to having all the hearings and the floor sessions online so you can watch the work being done. And you realize they actually get along fairly well, in all honesty, and they're really trying hard. And I think you can do bill tracker. If you have a specific bill you're interested in, you can sign up to get all the notices of hearings and what it may be on the calendar. But again, I think, if you can offer solutions and, based upon your experience, I think that greatly helps. When I would respond like for my district, the community, the committees I was on, and then anything outside of that was the last. Anything outside the country probably didn't get answered.
Well, and that's if you think, the legislators' jobs, it's incredibly difficult. Because they've got, in 80 days, they have to handle every single topic from prisons to higher ed, to property tax, to you name it, hospital issues, health and human services issues. I mean, just the vast number of issues. So they don't know all this stuff. They can't know all this stuff, and then, lobbyists try and help them, but lobbyists are also coming at it from a particular angle. So the more you can hear specifically from constituents, I think it matters to them. I mean, they want to hear that.
And just little things, don't send all caps. No, seriously, it happens. Keep it like 3 paragraphs if you can. Spelling and grammar matter. I was on the education committee, and one of my colleagues I sat next to got a letter from a K-12 teacher that had seven spelling errors on it, and I got all 7 of them circled and handed to me. You know, it was, and believe it or not, I mean, some of this has caused, you know, the rules, and you may not believe this, but I'm still mad about it. Senator Wanzik, when he was in the Senate Education Committee, had a letter or an email from a parent saying, vote for this bill, period. Remember, your daughter is in my class.
Oh my God.
That's the kind of thing that really, you know, sometimes you gotta count to 100, sleep on it, show it to somebody, and then send it.
We call it the therapeutic draft. Do the therapeutic draft and don't send it anywhere.
And legislatively speaking, NDSU may not be liable for something someone writes, but remember, you know, legislators sometimes, if they know who it is, they might hold it against NDSU. I mean, in all honesty, you know, I got another snarky letter from Tim Flacco today. He works for NDSU, and, you know, yeah, they're sitting down in appropriations, so.
And this, you know, be careful on these things too. We've got on the email, I actually personally had a conversation back when I was general counsel. State's attorney called me up about some emails a student sent with regard to whether or not that constituted a violation of the Corrupt Practices Act, because the student they're using the student account, but in essence, it's also their personal account. This is what, like, there's a lot of places where there's some gray area here. I said like 9 out of 10 times we can give you a straight answer, but there's definitely, and you know, when I was talking over the state's attorney's office, I'm like, look, these are personal email accounts. We encourage them to use them for not just for students. Now, that was a while ago. Now students don't even use email, so it's probably a moot point. But when they did, they still use a private server. Now, you know, they're not using their NDSU account, but at the time there was a lot of personal use of student. Now, us as employees, use of personal, it's very easy to say, don't do it. When you're a student, and it gets a little bit more gray. What is it, a student account? And, you know, my argument to the state's attorney office was like, yeah, there's this grayness. And second of all, we're trying to educate them to become political. I mean, like, the emails they were sending were not inappropriate emails. They were showing a level of engagement and civic activities that we're trying to encourage as a university. And like, we turn around and try and charge them with that. Like, so like it went away. But what I'm trying to say is these things do happen. People do raise them up. And it was the opponent on the other side who's always trying to catch somebody and cause headlines and things along those lines. So yeah, it definitely happens.
And don't lead with a snark and then go to, I want something. I mean, you know, write it like you're applying for a job or something like that, you know, with the kindness.
I always say that on work emails, and having had a snarky email be quoted in the newspaper myself. It's a lived experience. So don't do it.
If you have a private email, but you're in your office and you send an email to a legislator using your private email.
Yeah.
And say, I don't like this bill, or I'm a constituent. Is that okay? Or is it you're at NDSU, you're using our equipment? Basic, because I want to know the other way around. You said it's okay if they contact us. Is it okay? for us?
So facts matter, and faculty versus staff. Now, is it during normal business hours? Is it after normal business hours? Is it did you cancel class in order to send off this nasty gram, or is it during the lunch hour? Are you hooked up on your computer to the Wi-Fi network, or are you using your Verizon connection? Because if you're just using your Verizon connection, and you're using your personal phone, and you're using your personal email account, and you're on your lunch hour, I don't care. If you've canceled class because you want to send a nasty gram, you're signed up over the university Wi-Fi using a university phone, it could be different. Now, it's still probably de minimis, all those things, but we don't know. So facts matter. That's why I say there's this edge on the side. Like, I don't connect my personal phone to the university's Wi-Fi. Just don't. You know, I got the unlimited plan through Verizon, and I use it. You know, just to err on the side of caution for that kind of stuff. but I'm a little bit over the top probably on stuff.
But you should also remind everybody, you don't do business on your personal phone because then it becomes
Well,
a record.
the only business I do through my personal phone is my email account, which is duplicated on my work account. But yes, because a public record does not matter where it's created, it is a public record. It's not the location of the record that makes it public. It's the nature of the record that makes it public. If you are doing public work through a personal email account, you have an obligation to produce those emails to us. We don't like that. We don't want that happening because we'd like to have access to all the work emails through the work servers, and that makes it easier for us to comply with the public records laws. But I have gone to employees, even presidents, and said, you have to produce these Gmail accounts. It was a lot of fun.
What are the regulations on using your own personal email? So I have a faculty that uses their own personal or prefers their own personal email. They're willing to open those records to NDSU, but they prefer theirs because they don't use the NDSU one typically.
Yeah, they're not allowed to do that.
So what's the what regulation is that?
It's called,
What?
we have NDSU IT policy on it, and there's a federal law called FERPA. If they're using it for class teaching, every document that pertains to a student that they use their personal email account is FERPA protected and is not covered by the university service. We are literally just dealing with this with a faculty member today.
Probably mine.
They have to run
He's
it.
the only one on campus that does it. So.
Yeah, they have to use it through the university because, if that employee picks up and leaves employment tomorrow, or heaven forbid, gets hit by a bus, NDSU has no access to any of those for educational records. We have no access. We have record retention policies that require us to keep those. We have, there could be student information on there that is gone.
These things need to be explained because I think that the conflict is it's not understood what the actual regulation is. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I mean, that's, but yeah, no, you have to, for work stuff, you have to use the NDSU email account.
So my other question is, please, nobody throw anything at me. You said there's no backing a candidate at all on campus, or so you can't back a campus, you can't.
Official, as an institution or an employee, you can't back a candidate.
So wearing my Trump t-shirt to work is.
So that gets into an interesting question, classroom management and things along those lines. I mean, can you wear buttons? Can you wear things along those lines? I think it's probably a bad idea, to be perfectly frank.
Well, it is, because I'll
Yeah.
get stuff thrown at me, so, I understand that, but I'm just
And
curious.
it has nothing to do with who the candidate that you identified. I couldn't care less. I take my sentence that says, institution have to be neutral. I take it very seriously. No, everybody, the Republicans in the state think I'm extremely far left and the Democrats think I'm extremely conservative, and I love that. So that none of them know where I stand. But so it has nothing to do with who your candidate is. It has everything to do with just, it's probably a bad idea to wear that stuff in a classroom setting, but it's not.
It would
it's
be in my
not-
office, I don't teach,
Yeah.
so it would just be in my office, so.
I don't think that would be it's an interesting, I don't think that would be prohibited.
Okay. Talking with students about, they come to me and talk about candidates. I do not take a stance either way with the students. I don't let the students know what my view is. Some may know just off of talking, but talking politics with the students, is that off limits
No.
too?
No, I mean, it's, we have conversations,
Right.
it's not, you're not using state. if it's an educational conversation, it's a thing over over coffee, nobody's saying you can't have a conversation on these topics, and nobody even can say this is my position. I will say it gets a little dicey, and this is where the problem lies. If you say you're for candidate X, and candidate X has made a position against a group, and you give a bad grade to a member who's in that group, that person can then turn around and maybe file a retaliatory action for saying the bad grade was not due to how I did in the class, it was due because I was a member of class X, maybe to the opposite political party, maybe this. You kind of open yourself up, and you open the institution up to some protected class activity, maybe, things along those lines. So that's why I say it's probably permitted. It might not be the best idea, because you could open yourself up to some challenges down the road. So keeping them separate is probably best, but nothing's prohibited. I mean, and having that conversation. Now, what is prohibited if you say, I vote for X and you're all going to vote for X too, or I'm voting for X and you all get, extra credit if you can go out and show me that you voted for X, or that you voted for this, or that you donated Y, or, whatever. Those activities are prohibited. But, but merely wearing, an insignia, something along those lines, probably not that's permitted.
Back to the email conversation, I don't know the policy number, but email is the official means of communication.
Yeah.
So that's a clear one if you need something for your faculty. We can find that.
That doesn't work for him. So I thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I just, it's a challenge.
Do you need an email from Chris sent to his personal email?
No.
Yeah. I get the policy thing, and the policy thing should be enough. The federal law thing should also be enough.
Yeah.
It should be, but he has contradictions to it.
I don't know if we're talking about the same person. I have no idea. So
Oh, I
that
know
we're
it
gonna-
is. It's the
Well,
only
it
one I
might be
can't.
useful to send out a general email to all of the employees saying, again, NDSU, do not use your personal email for this, with just two things. Because I know other people who do that as well. We just need to not nip it on the bud, but just address it. I'm breaking in because I know that our speaker has a 1 o'clock meeting he has to be at.
but I can stick around if anybody has
You
any
can stick
questions.
around.
I can do the more 5
A
minutes.
different meeting, so I'm going to leave.
Okay.
And
You're gonna leave me with Tyler though, right?
Tyler,
Okay.
here. Quick question on signs. Can they put a sign in their window of their office for a candidate or for or against a initiative measure?
I should have left with Dennis.
That's my question.
Yes. It's a tricky question. We've gone around on this. So, at Miami, where I was at beforehand, we don't have a similar policy here, but I don't know that you'd be allowed. We had a policy at Miami that said you could not, and it was not based on, it was content neutral. It simply said you couldn't do anything with exterior facing windows, for aesthetic reasons. That the buildings looks like this way. We don't want it posters and everything up cluttered up. And so we don't have a similar policy here, and some people have put stuff up on posters and stuff. In my mind, the interior of our office, inward facing, is you have more free speech rights in that kind of interior facing space. Exterior gets a little bit more complicated for me. But I can't sit here and quote you chapter and verse on what violation that would be. So I'd find something though.
Christy Simon just stated, policy 158.1. I'm assuming that is for emails. I did have a question for kind of piggybacking off of yours, professors, faculty, staff, whoever use, say it's a Gmail personal account. I would assume this falls under the same category. Professors that create a Gmail specifically tailored to a class in order so all of those emails are nested. you mentioned, you know, if that professor got hit by a bus, IT services wouldn't have access to those emails and be able to produce them via FERPA for FERPA
Yeah.
purposes type of thing. Is that correct or?
I guess I'm not understanding the technical.
You're assuming they're using the NDSU Gmail.
Using maybe a personal Gmail that's created simply for a class, so they may have 40 to.
I think that's not okay.
That's probably not
The
okay.
NDSU Gmail
Yes.
And that's
probably
it.
is,
Gmail.
yeah,
You've got Google, you can set up
Oh,
an email.
that's what I
But
mean.
you can use your Gmail. They have a G Drive and stuff like that.
I got the Google Drive,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Not you, Tim.
Run while you can.
That is lemon.
I guess that's it. Thank you all. Appreciate it.